Hi, and welcome to my basic combat guide for the last spell. I'm Icon, and this video is ought to help you out to survive the first 5 and more nights in this game. I'm going to talk about strategies that you can use before the combat begins, strategies that you can use during combat, and a few things about gear management on your heroes as well. So let's get started with the preparations beforehand. I can't emphasize enough the value of ballistas and catapults. They are locked behind very high tainted essence costs, 4,000 and 5,000, but they are very much worth the effort. Also, it's really important to utilize your defenses. The easiest way is just to go for wooden walls outside where your people can stand behind, and a couple of barricades outside for your enemies to chow down. These barricades will just get eaten by the incoming zombies, but they prove a very cheap and easy way to slow down the horde a bit. But actually the wooden walls, especially the reinforced wooden walls, are the really powerful part, because they allow you to fire through and slow down the enemies. Your enemies will always just rush towards you, attack either a hero or a structure in that preference order. So they will just rush towards these walls and try to eat them, which will buy you valuable time to bang these enemies down. If you haven't used these items yet before, start using them. They're really powerful for your defenses. Beyond that, I really like to use the mana well and the temple if I can afford them, where you can turn workforce into healing and mana. Since I like to spam my mana skills a lot during the combats, I really started to enjoy these. Keep in mind that you can upgrade them to get a free usage, which is worker free. Okay. Beyond that, we are not really able to do that much more during the early game, so we're going to talk about our heroes' gear now as well. So ideally, I like to combine a ranged weapon, a high range weapon, and a low range weapon on my people together, because I made the experience that this is really a effective way to work with your characters. Sometimes I mix a high range ranged weapon and a low range melee weapon together to make short work of incoming enemies, but we're going to talk about that in a few minutes later. What I want to emphasize quite hard is that it's really worth it to supply your melee person with a ranged weapon on top of that, because it's really useful if you can use your last few action points when you're not close enough to your enemies anymore, by just swapping over to your secondary weapon. Overall, if you haven't used the secondary weapon slot on your characters yet, start using it, because it's really one of the most powerful aspects in this game, because swapping between these weapon sets is free. You don't need to pay anything for that. So we're going to check out the gear here, because one of my people is still undersupplied, but sadly I don't have a magical option here, because I really like to stick to one damage type if possible, like magical items and ranged items. The only exception are melee people, because it's just very powerful to mix a ranged weapon on top of that, or use another physical weapon which has a higher range, like the spear, if you just don't want to drop the damage percent bonuses from your level ups. Okay, beyond that, keep an eye out for armor items and block items if you want to equip frontliners. That's the most powerful. Well, block, armor, and resistance are the most powerful stats for your frontliners. Armor is a virtual HP shield. Block just shaves off a flat amount of damage from your people, and resistance is yet another percentile reduction of damage. All these, well, dodge should be also included, but all these 4 stats together make your frontliners viable. If you want to have a melee person, you really should focus on these stats, because otherwise your people will melt away in the sunshine. Okay, we're going to get into the combat phase now, just like that, because we're now talking about the combat in the next phase. When you're deploying your characters, I really like to go for a even spread At the beginning of the game, you don't have access to 4 people to begin with, so it's quite important that you try to rush past the 5th night to get access to the inn where you can recruit more people. Also keep in mind that at the Seer's Hut you can enlarge the radius where the enemies spawn. This is a very powerful upgrade as well. Okay, when we're facing here the enemies, it's really important that you keep your strong AoE effects behind, or you wait with your strong AoE effects until larger amounts of enemies are available. Right here, for example, I would strongly avoid spamming out AoE effects here. Like this wouldn't really work out. So in the first few turns, just try to take down as many enemies as possible. Also, it's really vital to say that your secondary weapon slot will also give you the ability to use more than 4 action points viably, because as you see here, the mana-free skills are mostly gated to 4 uses per turn, so you won't be able to utilize all your action points if you only have 1 weapon set. Okay, we're just taking out a few enemies here. Sadly, she has a melee weapon, so we can't really do this, or can we? Keep in mind that with these walls, you can just jump over them with this effect. Then we get over here, take a quick stab on our enemy, and then we can just go back again. It's really important that for your fights in general, you should try to get your melee people as far away from the enemies after the turn is over as possible, unless you want them to tank your enemies. If that's the case, you should operate like the exact opposite. Try to put them somewhere where they can tank properly, because if you have enough armor, block, and other stats, you can sometimes put up a character that can just tank the enemies. Okay, so once situation looks like that, it's worth using your AoEs. One thing that I can't emphasize enough, spend your mana and spend it like crazy. Always try, of course, to get the most use out of your mana, but there's nothing worse than holding back your resources for no good reason at all. You will always have the opportunity to replenish your mana at the next day. If you don't like the mana well, you can also utilize mana potions, which you can buy from the merchant, which are really, really powerful as well. Also, for example, to give you another cool example what you can do with melee characters, we have here the staff, which is a melee magic weapon. Most melee weapons have either a sort of big CC or some sort of mobility. For the staff here, you have the stunning entrance skill, allowing you to jump on an enemy, and then we can just use that jump, where you see it only costs us 1 movement point to do this, and then wreak havoc upon our enemies. Well, this is not really a good positioning here right now, but it does the trick. And then you can use the rest of your remaining mobility points to get back into a favorable position again. So this way you can get in fight and get back outside again. It's really important for your melee characters that you learn to utilize this back and forth motion of combat as good as possible. So, because if you don't get your melee people out of combat again, they will really, really die quickly, especially since HP are not fully recovered at the end of the night. So the sword, as you see here, is a very, very mobile weapon, and it really shines in the way that you have to prepare how to move before you do. As you see here, this is a good example of how not to do it, because now we're stuck in midst of our enemies and we will take a lot of damage in the next turn, to give you a good example of how not to do it. So we're now full of action points, and sometimes when you don't have mobility points but action points, sometimes you can't do stuff like that. Also keep in mind that this works too. Oh no, it doesn't. Sometimes with some skills you can't just aim at the ground. We couldn't do it because we were hitting the wall. That's why. And as you see here, I had no mobility points, but just by the usage of my dash skills, I was able to get this guy out of the fire line. Pretty decent trick as well to utilize. So at the end of the day, you really should try to utilize your mobility and action points as good as possible. You're not forced to use them up at the end of every turn. You really are not. Don't get the impression that you would need to empty up your pool always. It's just not like that. One thing that I want to talk about here is that whenever a skill looks like this, when it has such a field of engagement as you saw, I was able to put it on the ground. Be very careful with these skills because you can miss your enemy quite easily, and you should really not click too quickly. And another thing that I want to talk about is be careful. There's friendly fire in this game. So whenever you use AoE effects, only use them when you're able to not hit your colleagues. With the catapult, it has to be manually triggered, and as you see here, massive damage. If you have real big trouble getting past certain parts of the game, just grinding yourself up to this part of the game is already very, very helpful and will give you a lot of extra options just to rule over your enemies. So, as a rule of thumb with the last spell, whenever you struggle with getting into more progress, just grind up your advantages. This will pay off ultimately. Especially strong are all these perks that give you extra base stats, because they are just wonderful. And yeah, defensive structures like the ones I mentioned. Extra weapons are also very valuable to unlock, but extra stats and the defensive structures are, in my opinion, more powerful because they give you entirely new options to defend yourself. And as you saw here, these enemies were are dodging a lot. That's the last thing that I want to talk about. Specialize your characters. It's really, really worth it to check out stuff like the snipe shot on the longbow, which nullifies dodge. This is really good to have, for example, 1 or 2 characters which are really good at denying the enemy's dodge. There's also enemies with a high armor rating. I sadly don't see a lancer right now when I need one, but there's high-end armor enemies, and there's skills which have armor piercing statistics which just get past the enemy's armor. It's also really, really worth it to have, yet again, 1 or 2 people that feature armor piercing attacks and focus them onto these enemies, because dodge can really mess up your turn. The most important thing every turn is to deal as much damage as possible and take down as many enemies as possible in one turn. This, I can't emphasize it enough. This is one of the most important things, to maximize the slain enemies per turn. So therefore, it's really, really cool if you have specialists that just need less action points to get the job done. Because as you saw there just right now, Albrecht didn't hit anything. Just keep in mind, bows are getting more and more inaccurate the further away your enemy is, and magic weapons are really good at mitigating enemies' resistance. Like, for example, these ghost enemies here feature a really high amount of resistance. Getting on top of them with your magical abilities is very, very feasible, and the thing you should do to round up the topic of specializations. Okay guys, I hope that was somewhat helpful for you. These are only the basic strategies. There's a lot more to implore, and I hope that you will get there and find out what I'm talking about there. So feel free to drop a comment down below. If there's any questions, feel free to ask away, and leave a thumbs up on that video if you liked the video overall or found it helpful or whatever. Your help is awesome. And also check out my channel. I do daily content there, so feel free to subscribe and turn on those notifications to not miss any future episodes. Also, feel free to check out the links down there. You'll find there my Twitch channel where I do daily videos and streams, so feel free to join by. I'd be more than happy if you did. Last but not least, also check out those ways and means to support me by buying me coffee or whatever you want to do. It's really cool if you check those out, but don't you mind if you don't. Watching this video already helped me a ton. See you guys soon and have fun.